Hi, good afternoon, and welcome to the second week of the Hijacked Brain. And today we're going to be talking about the depth to which the debate between the kind of idea that human beings need civilization and really the nation state and its security forces as a necessary form of restraint because their natures are so savage. That idea and its opposing opposite, which is this concept that left to their own devices, human beings, especially when resources cease to become too much of a problem, can really thrive and flourish, or that freedom, the capacity to act in and make choices, and to have agency, that this brings out the best in people. These two oppositional ideas, we're going to trace them back to some extremely important philosophical antecedents. That is, two philosophers who crystallized these concepts, and one was born after the other died, so they weren't actually in conjunction with one another, but the latter one knew of the other's ideas, right? And they were locked into this kind of awesome conflict, and they were both very eloquent and persuasive. So at first we have this guy Thomas Hobbes, who did an interesting thing, like many philosophers, including Descartes, who you may know, but also Socrates, looked at himself very, very closely in order to try to understand something more broadly about humanity and the world that we live in, right? And now this can be dangerous, but it can also be quite fruitful. So Thomas Hobbes was born in a time of great instability, and he himself felt this instability quite keenly, and the dangers of the world, right? So he also felt the fact that he didn't really trust himself, in a sense. And so as he used himself as a kind of textbook to read into the souls and the minds of other humans, what he saw was this kind of dark vision, right? Which is that the passions and the thoughts of humans tend towards darker regions, that we're constantly on the lookout, afraid of one another, and are on the lookout of how to overcome each other. And so he believed that were humans left to their own devices, we would destroy ourselves, that we would live in this kind of anarchical state that would be just awful and terrifying, and would result in the most unimaginable kind of terrors and horrors visited on humans. And this is because we're driven by fear of one another, and also a kind of a lust for power and status, right? Which in our era is perhaps measured by wealth as much as anything else. So his feeling was that the only solution to this problem that we find ourselves in, right, because our natures are given to us, they're not so chosen, right, is that we must have a powerful ruler, which he called a Leviathan, which we will give over our freedom to choose, and that Leviathan will control through violence, or the threat of violence, our society, so that we can kind of live in peace, and that trust for one another can only be achieved through superior firepower, right? Now, on the other hand, you had a French philosopher born somewhat later, whose name was Jean-Jacques Rousseau, and he, sometimes thought of as like an idealistic person, but he was a good writer, and his views are still influential, especially in early childhood education, for example. his idea was that even though we're taught to believe that civilization is this pinnacle of human achievement, that our technology and our wealth and our food production are miraculous, that in fact civilization has a relatively negative effect on the human soul and on the human body. That by placing ourselves inside these very tightly prescribed civilizational boxes, we in fact give over a lot of the pleasures, enjoyments, and opportunities to thrive that humans are born with. His ideas are actually becoming more credible now that archaeology and certain historians have uncovered features of what early civilizational life was like for people. So there was this notion originally that as hunter-gatherers, our lives were very brutal and ugly, and that once we achieved farming, then we started building these civilizational achievements like the pyramids. But Rousseau believed that these achievements weren't so much achievements for humanity as they were for elites, for powerful, small numbers of individuals who were able to persuade and use force to essentially enslave their populations. And that for the great majority of human beings, civilization was a mistake, and a brutal mistake. Rousseau went on to say that this doesn't mean that we can't have happy lives inside a civilization. It's just that we must remember the aspects of our life and our nature that make us the most happy and seek them out within the civilization that we live in. So, taking the ideas of these philosophers and looking at them in the light of new historical, archaeological, and anthropological evidence allows us to see these ideas play out a little bit in real life in history. So, in other words, we can take the idea of a Hobbes or the idea of a Rousseau and ask ourselves, how much does it dovetail? How much is it in keeping with the archaeological evidence of early human life? So one of the first places that people look for this is in the evolution of Homo sapiens and the question of why is it that Homo sapiens have been so successful as species, at least from the point of view of reproduction and dominance. Now, not all Homo sapiens experience the great success of the species equally, but nevertheless, as a species, we, our particular primate, has unquestionably been successful. So, one of the ways in which we've tried to understand our own success is to ask ourselves, what was it that set humans apart from other primates? Was it our intelligence? For a long time, we assumed that humans were vastly more intelligent than any other of the great apes or from early hominins of other kinds, like Neanderthals, for example. So early childhood specialists designed a series of tests, and they took baby humans, well, toddlers actually, cute little 2 or 3 year olds, and cute little 2 or 3 year old chimpanzees and orangutans, and tested them for a number of different categories which are commonly associated with intelligence. So spatial understanding and calculation, the understanding of cause and effect, that is, if you press this button, does it open up a little box that has food inside? Also, we can test for memory and information processing. So do we remember that by pressing this button, it will open up this box and lead us to food, right? And there are even ingenious tests that look to see whether or not humans, chimpanzees, or orangutans are better at games that involve tricking the other person playing the game with them in order to achieve a reward. And In all of these categories, humans scored worse, mostly worse, or just barely tied with the other great apes of the same age. Now, it's true that these were toddlers that we were testing, but nevertheless, this should be a reasonably good test of innate intelligence, that is, the intelligence that you're born with, because at the ages of 2, 3, and 4, humans have had less time to learn socially, so that their intelligence is mostly drawn from within, from their own innate capacity, as is the case with the primates. So this was mind-blowing to the people who were testing us, right, that this would be true. And it gave rise to the notion that perhaps the kinds of traditional forms of intelligence that we associate with success that have to do with competition, out-competing others in various kinds of games, right? Games can be deadly serious. That these kinds of intelligence aren't really a main feature of human intelligence. So, in other words, this goes back to our earlier concept that what if humans aren't actually so great at games that involve total competitive self-interest? What if that isn't actually within our nature, even though we've been told that it is, right? The possibility of this means that then some of the people who are exceptional at playing games of self-interest, tricking others, manipulating others, might succeed in such a world, but that those people aren't necessarily a good example of what constitutes a good person or even a smart person by the standards of humanity. Thanks, that's part 1, and we'll explore these ideas in part 2 further.